Hello and welcome to our final session of the folded pattern room and shade with the CordlesPRO wideband lift sheet system. We have a lot to cover today and hope that you've enjoyed the class and that if you're not to this point in your sample, at least you have it up here and you'll have the class recordings so that you can go back and look at the recordings while you're working on your project. If you have any questions today, put those in the chat box and I'm going to pull that up so you can check it. All right. And let's get started here and review what we've done so far. Fabricated an interline shade, sewn on the rings, and put in the J guides and the battens. So that's really wasn't that hard, pretty much just like making any other Roman shade. Now we need to add the lift band sheet. So you will cut the lift band sheet material 4 inches less than the finished width. Keep in mind that my instructions are different than the safety shade instructions. So you have, if you ordered a kit, I don't know if they send instructions with the kit or not, but they have them on their website that you can download and you can kind of compare mine with theirs. I think the allowances are different. If you're unsure, don't cut your lift band sheet until you get your J guides on. You want it to fit between the J guides. It doesn't have to be, perfect. You don't want it too big, but there's a little wiggle room there. So you want the lift band sheet to fit between the J guides. So I'll start my video. So I'm marking this with a disappearing pen. The 10% openness material, which is a roller shade material, is easy to cut. We talked about that in the very first class. The weave is easier to cut than that blackout sheet that's available as well. And you do want to cut it nice and square. After that's done, you're going to put a pocket in the bottom and it needs to be a 2-inch pocket. So you want to fold over about 2 1/8 of an inch or 2 1/4 of an inch. I like using the fabric stapler to hold it in place instead of pens. Mark down the middle, again, using the disappearing marker. And then machine stitch a double pocket. So it'll be 2 1-inch pockets. The fabric is stiff, but it sews easy enough. Make sure when you staple it together that you don't staple in the center because that's where you're going to have to sew that center rod pocket. And be sure to back stitch on the ends. And you're going to leave this open. You're not going to close up the 2 ends. You're going to insert the acrylic rods into those 2 pockets at the bottom. So you need to cut the acrylic rods and insert those into the bottom and make a pull tab for pulling up and down on the bottom of this lift band sheet. So that's what this video is going to cover. So I've marked the acrylic rods with some painter's tape because it's hard to draw on them. I'm using the same bolt cutter that I would use to cut the metal rods. Watch out. It'll shoot across the room. So don't cut it near a friend.
So we have 2 of the clear acrylic rods. And they go into this double pocket that we've made at the bottom. And sometimes it's a little tight, but you want them to be tight. And if you're having trouble getting it started, you might need to open it up with just something like a pencil. I've got a purple thing there. There we go. I'm going to start one and then I'm going to start the other one. All right, that one wasn't quite as tight. And shoving them both all the way in, and they'll end up even. And you don't close up the pocket on the end. They're not going to fall out. They're not going to go anywhere. And there's the 2 rods in the pocket at the bottom. These acrylic rods in this pocket fit between the J guides on the bottom of the shade. So put those in on both sides for now. And we need to mark where to put the pull tab. So I slipped the rod pocket, the guides between these 2 acrylic rods in that pocket. And I'm just going to lay this lift band sheet evenly up the shade for right now. I want to mark where this pull tab is going to be. You want to be able to reach it from behind the shade, but you don't want it sticking out below the shade. So about 1 inch from the bottom of the shade would be good. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that 1 inch from the bottom of the shade. And then I want the tab to be sewn above these rod pockets so that when I'm pulling the shade, I'm pulling these pockets, rod pockets down. You can make the pull tab white to match the lift band. You can make it a print to match the hem of the shade, whatever you want to do. I'm going to make it match the shade. So I need to get a scrap of fabric and let's pattern match it. This is the same heavy stiffener that I used in the bottom hem to give the bottom hem some body. And so I wouldn't have to add a weight bar. So I need a 5-inch piece and my scrap piece is perfectly 5 inches. And then I don't want it to go too far down below the hem of the shade. So I have that pin there marking 1 inch from the bottom of the shade. And then I'm going to come up and mark where I want the top of the pull tab to be sewn onto the lift sheet. I'm going to mark that with a disappearing pen. That's the top of the acrylic rods. And then I'm going to add a 1/2 inch above that. So there's the finished size of the pull tab, which ended up being 5 inches by 8 inches for my shade. Your shade is going to be different. You could also use Skirtex or Buckram or Peltex, heavy interfacing of some kind, just to give this pull tab some body. I'm going to put the adhesive side up, centering that. And I can center on the pattern motif, or I can use my yardstick here and find 18 inches as the center. And put some pins in there to hold that in place. And now I need to pattern match the fabric. So I can move this lift sheet out of the way now. I'm going to go ahead and take it off of the shade. And let's find a pattern match. The great thing about these iron-on adhesives is I can get the fabric exactly where I need it to be and then iron it on and then finish covering. You can also sew like a pocket and slip the stiffener down inside of the pocket. I do want to make sure I have enough to fold to the back. So it's going to cover that pull tab like that. So I do have enough there to go around the back. I have this laying on and I'm pattern matching, and I need enough of the fabric to cover the back side of that pull tab. So I'm just going to pull this over and trim away some of the excess. I also need enough at the top to have a sewing area. I don't want that crisp fabric. I don't want to sew through that. So I'm going to allow about an inch above my stiffener. And to get away some of the excess fabric, I can always trim it away more. But for right now, I just want to make sure I have enough to cover that pull tab. This is the same approach we're going to use when we make the return end covers. So this is a little bit of sewing on this, but not a lot. Okay, and lining up the pattern. I have the stiffener underneath. My pull tab is right where it needs to be. So I cut a rough piece about the size I needed and holding that all in place with the adhesive side up on the stiffener, lining up the fabric without letting that stiffener move. And now I can iron it to set the fabric onto the stiffener. So I've added double-sided tape to those edges so I can turn them under and press that in place. That's the Jules tape, not at the top because I'm going to sew there. Okay, that looks good. Let's put it in place so I can mark it on the lift band sheet. I'm going to put it underneath the lift band sheet. So that's going to come on top. Okay, so that's how it's going to look from behind the shade. So there's the pull tab. So I'm getting it all matched up. And I'm going to slip these rods out so that I can sew this, and then I'll put them back in. So that's where the pull tab is all lined up. It's pattern matched. So I get that pinned on. Now I'm going to go sew that so it's nice and sturdy right above that rod pocket.
Okay, there's the pull tab and the lift band sheet with the pockets is ready to go. And I failed to mention, although it was written on the screen, that you cut those acrylic rods 4 inches less than the finished width. So they're cut to fit the lift band sheet. Now that you have the lift band sheet with the pull tab, you can go ahead and put that under the J guides on the shade.
All right, the pull tab is sewn onto the back of the lift sheet. And I'm going to go ahead and slide those J guides over the rod pocket centered on the seam. And then slide the acrylic rods into the rod pocket. And they're going to stay right between the J guide there. And then you want to slip the lift band sheet underneath the rest of the J guides up to the top of the shade. So I want to make sure that the shade is nice and flat and that the lift sheet is nice and flat. I'm giving it a tug just slightly. I don't want to lift the shade, but I do want to make sure it's not saggy baggy. So now that's in place. So now the shade is ready for the roller tube. This is a pipe cutter, and it's made for cutting hollow pipes, which you can use on the aluminum tubes because they are hollow. And we usually use a saw. We have two saws set up here at Work for Tech. We have one set up for wood and one set up for metal. But I'm not going to get the saw out for one tube, and I wanted to show you this little tool. You can find it at any hardware provider, supplier. It has a sharp blade inside. So don't put your hand against that sharp blade. You can wheel it in and out. And rollers up here. So you're just going to score and cut. So you want to bring the blade up slightly. And I'm lining it up to my mark. I'm cutting this tube 1.5 inches less than the finished width. So I'm trying to get the light here so that you can see. There's the blade. So it's now snug next to the tube. These wheels are going to let me roll this around, and it's going to score this aluminum tube. As it scores, it's going to get looser. You tighten the bottom. Go around some more. You can sort of do a combination of turning with one hand and rotating the roller tube with the other. And it's just a matter of doing this all the way around until you cut all the way through the aluminum. If you find it's hard, loosen up a little bit. Tighten. Tighten. And we're almost through. I can see light through there. If you need to do a little bit more. Let's unscrew the blade, set it back down in there. And what it is on this tube, there's little teeth on the inside of the tube. See those little teeth right here? Haven't cut through that yet. This is a good tool to have on site in your toolkit for installations if you ever need to cut down some hardware, some aluminum decorative hardware you can cut down with this tool. And then pull your blade in because you don't want to get cut. And this tool has a little shaving device or tool on the top. Bring that up. This is a little blade that you can use, just get rid of all those pesky little rough places on the inside. Now I need to vacuum that off the work table. I should have put down a piece of paper instead of putting all those little filings on the work table. So I'll vacuum that up and then we're ready to assemble the lift system.
And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I don't always cut tubes with that tool. It does require, if you have arthritis or something, it would be difficult if you're going to cut a lot of tubes like that. But it is a handy tool to have on hand when you don't feel like getting out the big saw, just doing one. So now that we have our aluminum tube cut, we're ready to attach that to the lift band sheet. You do want to make sure your lift band sheet is about 12 inches, 10 to 12 inches longer than the shade. You want to have rotations of the sheet around the tube. That allows you to pull down to engage the roller tube, and also just keeps it nice and covered so it won't ever come unstuck. So let's attach that.
It's time to attach the lift band sheet to the roller tube. The first thing I've done is I've cut the roller tube and I marked inset from each end, the width of the lift band sheet and a center mark. So I have a center mark on the lift band sheet and a center mark on the roller tube. And on the ends, I scored through the double-sided tape and peeled off the extra sticky tape, so I don't have any stickiness on the ends of the roller tubes. So now I can peel away this paper covering, expose the adhesive, and stick the roller shade on. A few things before I do that. One is I have some duct tape. I've already pulled off a piece of duct tape, approximately the width of the roller sheet, and stuck that onto the work table. And also I want to make sure that I put this lift band material on the roller tube so that it's rolling next to the shade when it's on the roller and not this way, not rolling off the back of the roller tube. You don't want it rolling off the back. You want to make sure it's rolling off the front. So I have the mark on the front, so I can line that up with the roller tube and it'll go around like that. I want to make sure that the lift band sheet is nice and square and even. So I'm looking over my shade, making sure it's even down the side hems. I have about 12 inches extra. You want extra to roll around the tube. And now I can peel away the paper and line up the marks and attach the lift band sheet to the roller tube. So I'm going to start in the center. And you want to make sure that you keep it perfectly even. And then take that extra duct tape and just add that on as a little extra adhesive there. Make sure that the lift band sheet will never pull away. So now this is ready for the brackets and the spring. So there's our lift band sheet ready to go.
So that's pretty easy. Not so hard. And the lift band material is really easy to cut and keep square. So it's not that difficult to get that on there. So now we're going to do the spring system. If you've ever done a roller spring system, this will be very familiar to you. They're all very similar, whether you order it from Rolly Company or Safety Shade or Rollies or Coolies or one of the other systems. The spring systems are all very similar. This is a little more of a pared down system that Safety Shade sends. It doesn't have as many parts. And I will talk through it in the video, but be sure to let me know if you have any questions.
I'm going to go over the components of the spring system. And of course, you're starting off with the spring. And this spring tightens as it rotates and allows the shade to lift up and down. You'll notice that there's some grooves here on this end. There's grooves. There's also this little, looks like a little button. It doesn't push in, but it looks like a little button. That's important. On the other end, notice that this wheel has a little cutout area on both sides. That's going to fit inside the tube, between the grooves in the tube. You have the same cutout area on the end of the spring unit. And then the stopper goes in the other end, and that also has those little cutout areas that are going to fit into the spring, and it's grooved. And you'll notice it does not have that little button. There are 2 brackets, and this is a pre-rotation tool, so we can pre-tighten the spring. The first thing I want to do is set the top stop plate. And this will save some time and also prevent the shade from being stuck in the down position right off the bat. So there is in your handout from Safety Shade, setting the top stop plate. And this is the stop unit. So this is what they're talking about. The shade height in inches, my shade is 72. So I'm just going to go with whatever's closest. So I'm going with 71. That means either 15 rotations or 3/4 inches from this spring on the side. So there's a stop spring. So this wheel needs to rotate 3/4 inches away from this spring. And that's 3/4. So it's this distance between the spring and this plate. Okay, so that's done. Now I can insert that in the roller tube, and that's going on the left side as I'm facing the shade. If I'm facing the shade from the front, this is going the left. And I'm lining up the grooves with the little grooves that are inside of the roller. I can roll this around, you can see them right there. So those grooves go around those little teeth. And then that's going to go in the end. And I'm going to have to give it a little good push, which I'm at an angle that I can't do that. So let me move around. If you find that's really tight and you can't push it in by hand, the tube got kind of squashed when I cut it. or maybe it's too many burrs on the inside. You don't want to hammer on the end of this and break anything. So I'm just going to put a board next to it and just hammer onto the board. So that's the stop, and the left side as I'm facing the shade. That's really important. If you put it in the wrong end, your shade isn't going to go up and down. The spring has to be on the correct side. Now we can insert the spring into the other side of the roller tube, and that is on the right as you're facing the front of the shade. Make sure that the little cutaway areas line up with the cutaway area inside of the roller tube. So you can see the grooves in the roller tube. And that little cutout fits around the groove. Then you get to the next wheel, make sure the cutout fits over the groove. And turn this around until you find that little button, and that also goes between that groove. That's really important. So don't forget that. So if you ordered this assembled from Safety Shade or from any other supplier, they're going to have a sticker, or they might take marker and just put an S to let you know which side of the tube the spring is on, so that you don't forget the spring goes on the right as you're facing the shade. And that is for this type of shade where it's going to waterfall off the front. The lift band sheet is waterfalling off the front. I'm going to tighten the spring using the rotation tool. The square end of the tool fits over the square end of the spring. This is the spring that we're winding. And just going to go clockwise. There is a chart, and the chart says I need 15 rotations. But in my experience and what I've learned from others is you want to go tighter than what they say until you feel it get really, really hard to turn. And I can feel that spring getting tighter and tighter and tighter. You don't want to go over 50 rotations, they say. Well, I'm not counting, but it feels really tight now. And if I let go of this, it would spring back really fast. But I can feel it starting to lock. So I'm just going to go back a quarter turn, force it to lock, and take it off. And we can adjust the tension later with the wheels on the roller, which are these wheels. So now I need to insert those into the system and get those mounted on the board. And the tricky part is with this, the Safety Shade brackets that they send, is getting your screwdriver in there. They actually recommend putting them on at an angle. So the easy thing to do is put one bracket on, slip the tube in, and then install the other bracket at an angle. Get those screws in there using a long screwdriver.
So we'll talk more about those brackets later. It's not, they're not ideal, but there's other alternatives. But yeah, they do say in their instructions, just get a screw in there at an angle. So I don't know whose bright idea was to have a bracket with a screw under the roller tube, but there's other options for that. So now that the lift band is on the roller, the spring and everything is assembled, it's in the brackets, it's time to put it on a work stand and see what happens. And then we'll know how we need to adjust. So let me just check and make sure we don't have a list of questions here. Very good. So far, so good. Okay, I've got the shade mounted. I'm going to tug on the lift sheet to start rotating it around the roller tube. Because I've got a little excess at the bottom. So I've got to work in that excess around the roller tube, which is fine. That's normal. Nothing to be worried about. Okay. Now I want to make it catch. There we go. The shade is working, but it's not springing up all the way. So I need to adjust the spring to make it a little bit tighter. It's not going all the way up. I do like that it doesn't go really fast, which is nice. So I need to set the spring a little tighter and maybe change the stop limit. So I do that with these wheels at the top of the shade. So I need to tighten the spring. And remember when we tightened the spring before we put it into the roller, or after we put it in the roller, before we put it in the brackets, I was using that tool and I was going clockwise. Well, I want to go clockwise some more with this wheel. So I'm just going to hold the tube with one hand and I'm turning it clockwise as I'm facing it from the end, just to keep tightening it. So I told you earlier that you think you might have it too tight, you probably don't. If it was too tight and I wanted to release the spring, I would be turning the wheel the opposite way. All right, that feels pretty tight. I'm going to let the spring go. And let's see what happens. It's a lot of trial and error. I'm getting there, but I'm not there yet. So I'll pull this down and tighten it up some more. So we're almost there. And now it's a little fast. So I still need to set the top up just a little bit more on the top stop limit. So I still need to adjust this top stop limit so it comes up a little bit more. So I'm just going to use the roller tube to turn the shade. So I'm rolling the roller tube towards me until I get it where I want it to be. And a little bit more. I think right there is exactly where I want it to be. And that's about as high up as it can go. And now I can tighten the wheel on the spring. And that should do it. The wheels are very almost sharp. So as you're turning and doing all that adjusting, it can be frustrating. You might want to wear just some sewing gloves or rubber gloves to protect your fingers, especially if you have a lot of shades. And now let's do a little troubleshooting with a wardrobe change. Sometimes things look different the next day when you come in. So it's not perfect there at that top fold because I have really wide spacing to the pattern repeat, 12¼ inch spacing. So I'm going to add a rib at the top, and this is after the fact.
I still think I can improve this top fold as it's coming up. So I've basted a stitch across where it folds, only catching the face fabric at the same point that the rings are sewn, but the inner lining and lining is basted together.
So I'll show you how to do that. I took the lift band sheet out of the J guides, put the shade face down, marked where that fold is that I want to insert a rib, put the pins in at the same place where the rings were sewn. So just at the top of the columns of rings, don't have to be exactly. And then I'm basting together with long stitches, the lining and inner lining. And then above each columns of rings, I'll catch through to the face like you would if you were sewing a ring on. And that will give me a place to set that rib. So let's speed this up a little bit. And it's not really going to show from the front, and the stitches.
So now I'm going to insert a fiberglass rib. And I'm going to do that on top of that basting stitch. So the basting stitch was here. And right here where a ring would have been sewn, I've sewn all the way through to the front. And I've pulled the side hem open on one side. And I'm going to insert this rib on top of the basting stitch between the lining and the inner lining. And I'm just going to drop it in there and let it set on top of the stitching. So just push that down. It's laying on top of the stitching. I've cut the rib 1 inch less than the finished width. So this should be a 1/2 inch from the beginning of the rib, should be a 1/2 inch from the side. And now I can glue this back up.
And you could cut your rib actually a little bit longer if you wanted to, even cut it a 1/2 inch less than the finished width. This is a good solution. I wanted to show this just for any Roman shade that you're making, that you feel like you need to add some ribs. The fabric might not be a fabric that really lends itself to folding. And as I said here, it's a big distance between the rings. And so there's more fabric in there that needs to fall forward. So just at that top, just at the top, I just added that rib in there. So now let's talk about what if you don't want your shade to go all the way up to the top.
So the rib is installed right here across that basting stitch so that it'll help support this top fold. Let's see how it works. And that fell into place better. That rib is sitting right there. So I like that. I feel more confident in that now. When the customer is operating the shade, it'll go up and down evenly. But here's a problem with this system and this size shade. This is a 72-inch long shade. It's really long. It goes all the way down to the floor here. Imagine up at the window And here at Workroom Tech, I'm going to install this up to the ceiling. That means when it's in the fully raised position, I won't be able to reach that pull tab. So can your customer reach the pull tab to operate the shade? If not, we can set the stop limit lower. I could have the stop limit here, which would probably, if I put it on the ceiling here at Workroom Tech, I might be able to reach that, or set the stop limit down a little further. But if this were at a window, now you're covering all that glass. So that's one of the drawbacks of a system where the customer has to be able to reach the pull cord or reach the tab or reach a ring in order to activate the shade and raise the shade. So what's the solution? If your customer wants this look at the window with all of their glass open, then you need to motorize it. This is a 1.5 inch roller tube. You can get the motor from Safety Shade, slides right in, use a remote control to operate the shade. Perfect solution. But for here at Workroom Tech, I already have a motorized shade, so I'm gonna have to set this stop limit down lower so that I can reach the shade to operate it. But I'm pleased with how it turned out. Because of the wide spacing of the folds, I did have to add that rib at the top, but I hope that that's been helpful for you to see how to troubleshoot these issues before the shade leaves the workroom. Now I want to change the stop limit so that I can reach the shade and operate it here at Workroom Tech. I'm going to lower it down another fold. It's not quite where I want it to be. I need it to come up just a little bit more. So I'm going to turn the tube by hand, disengage that spring, roll it up to where I want it to be. Don't let go of it. Rolling it up to where I want it to be. Now, if I let go of this, it's going to spring up. So I'm holding it with one hand and then tightening the stop with the wheel on the right until it tightens and it won't turn anymore. Now, let's see if it's set or not. I might have to tighten it a little bit more. Now it stops there. Okay, that's all good. Now I can make the end covers and then I'm ready to install the shade.
And one of the things you want to recommend to your customers when you sell them a spring operated shade, and this is tough if they have children, is you really don't want to be letting go of it and letting it spring up. Even though you have a set stop limit, it's better to operate it and to assist it up. In order to get it to go all the way up, you'd have to have the spring a little bit tight and it's going to be bumping against that stop limit. It's not going to be good for this long-term use of the shade. So you show them how to, you have to pull down to engage the spring. And then once it goes to a stopping position, then you let go. But you know, kids love to play with it, I guess. But yeah, just give them a little lesson, how-to lesson. So now let's do these return end covers, end flaps, whatever you want to call them. They take a considerable amount of time. So hopefully maybe this video will show you one more way.
It's time to make the end covers so that we don't see this bracket and it makes the end of the board look really nice. It's also a good idea with this style of board mounting because you can see up into this corner. So the end return flap or end return cover will fit right in there, finishing that off. I have 2 pieces of Peltex Pelon interfacing. And this is Peltex 71F, and the F stands for fusible. The fusible side is out. It feels gritty, and then the other side feels smooth. I have these cut so that I have 1.5 inches behind the front of the shade, and then it comes around, of course, to the back of the shade. The length is far enough to cover this bracket, but not too far down. If I were to have this stop limit all the way up, this is as far down as this flap could go because that's where the shade stops. So now let's cover this with fabric. To do that, I want to pattern match. So I'm going to pin this in place and then get the fabric and place that on there. I have my iron hot so that once I get the fabric in place, I can come over here with the iron and steam the fusible onto the fabric. So here's my scrap of fabric, and I need to find the pattern match. And that would be like right there. So I want to cut off an approximate piece that is about where I need it to be. So I'm going to bring that around. And so I'm just going to whack this off. So I have a smaller piece to work with and pattern match that. I'll just stab a few pins in here just to hold that in place. And that's not the pattern match. So I'm way off there. It's right there. It's hard to do things when there is a camera in the way. I can't get in front of this. I'm working off to the side. Okay, does that look better to you? Okay, I'm going to pin that in place just to hold it in place so I can wrap this around to where it needs to be to pattern match. Add a couple more pins. And I think that's good. That's pattern matching on the side. All right, now let me get the iron. Just going to hit this end with steam. And now I want to continue ironing that the rest of the way. So there's the piece under there. So I'm going to put that on the work table and continue ironing that. Now I can trim away the excess, leaving about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch to turn under. I'm going to press this under, and you can use a fusible tape, or you can use glue. I'm going to use glue. I can't tell you how many different ways I've made the end return covers. And this seems to be the easiest for me and the fastest. It's one of those things that you just, I don't know, it feels like it takes more time than it should. but it really does make a difference. It does make a shade look nice and finished. Okay, so there's my little square of Peltex that's covered with fabric. Now I'm going to add a piece of blackout lining. I like using dim out and blackout linings because they don't fray, so I don't have to turn under these edges. This is the fusible blackout from Dufix. And I cut an approximate size. I want it a little bit less than the size of the flap. And I got pretty close there. I trim it off a little more square. And because that's a fusible blackout, I'm putting the fusible side down. I'll steam that in place. Okay, so now I have a blackout lined, looks like a coaster, return end cover. I want to crease it and iron it where it needs to be, how it needs to be. So I need to go back over to my shade and make sure it matches. So let's do that. Okay, so which way does it go? That's the challenge. I think it's like that. All right, so it's going to go here and here. So that's where it needs to be folded and creased right there. So I have a pattern match. So I'm going to keep that fold and go steam that. It's nice if you're working with your shade on your work stand lowered right next to your work table. And there's a little left and return flap cover. And I'm going to add a piece of fusible loop strip. This is the Dufix fusible or iron-on Velcro, and this is the loop strip. That's going to go on the return. So this part will be stapled on the board under the shade. This part will be on Velcro so that the end flap can be opened and closed for installation. So that's going to get ironed on there. And I don't want to iron directly on that, so I have a scrap of fabric here. I'm just going to lay over that and steam that down. You can certainly sew on a piece of the loop strip here. You could sew that onto the blackout piece before you applied it onto the back. You can machine sew a piece on.
And then repeat the process for the other side. I wish I could work that fast.
Now to install the return, I'm going to put hook strip. This is adhesive backed. I am also going to staple it. So you could use hook strip that's not adhesive if you want to, since it's stapled. And then I'm going to put the loop strip that's adhered to the back of the end cover in place. Put that under the shade. Take a look, make sure I've got a good pattern match. And now I can staple this in. And there's a couple reasons I do that. One reason is it flattens it out. So as that shade comes over, if I had put Velcro under there, that would have added extra thickness and it wouldn't have seated down into the board. So it could have pushed out the shade a little bit. Also, the end flap covers, it's easy to get them confused about which one's left and which one's right. So if you just send them to the job site, they might not get put on properly. And finally, you don't have to look for them. You don't lose them. They're attached to the shade, but you can still access the roller tube. It's easier for installation if you can open these up and lift up the board without crushing it. And also, it gives you a little bit of adjustment if you want to lift it up or bring it down.
And when I send the shades out, I usually unvelcro the end flaps so that when I'm packaging them, they lay kind of flat instead of getting smushed underneath. So that's also another reason that's nice if it has the Velcro on it. Now let's get this baby up on the wall. Let's get it installed. You do want to pull the lift band sheet out of the J guides so that you can get between the lift band sheet and the fabric. And plan for a bracket that is big enough to come to the edge of the board so that you can get your drill right in there in front of the roller tube. The brackets on this system do not make it easy to take the roller tube in and out. So you need to be able to access that bracket. And now to put the lift band sheet back under the J guides on both sides. So let's talk about those brackets. The safety shade brackets that are included with the kit when you order from Safety Shade have that center screw, one hole that you, or two holes that you can try to get some screws in underneath the roller tube. It's really awkward to install. And if you need to take the roller tube out of the brackets, maybe for an installation or some other reason to troubleshoot, that's a real drag. So if you've ever used systems like Rollee's Acmeta's Easy Spring Plus, which is shown here, and this also has the wideband lift sheet installed on it, you see that there's a metal head rail. The brackets are installed into this metal head rail, and then that snaps into brackets that are really easy to mount the head rail into. So if I needed to take the system off the board at installation, bring it down so I could get, you know, an L bracket in there or to troubleshoot the shade, that is so much easier. If you order this system as a kit from Merrill Y. Landis, they do include it on this head rail. Other roller systems like Coolese, Vaco, and Rollee's also have brackets for roller systems that have a little bit of a spring on the end of them. So you can sort of engage the little spring to pull it out of the brackets and then pop it back in. Those are much easier because you can put the screws in and put both brackets on the board before you put the roller tube in. So there's better solutions, and my wish is that Safety Shade will step up and supply better brackets. But you can put this system on any roller tube system. Unfortunately, Safety Shade does not sell it with just the J guides, the lift band sheet, the battens, and the acrylic rods. They sell it as a complete kit. So you might need to get some better brackets from another resource. Just want you to know that you're not stuck with those brackets. And check a question and let's talk about pricing. So a great questions come in: is installation difficult for an inside mount? For inside mounting, most often, if possible, if it's into wood, I'm going to screw directly up through the board and into the ceiling of the frame. And with shades, I will set my screws in the workroom so they're ready, they're in and just ready to go through the wood, so that it's, once you put them up in there, you don't have to go look for screws, you just screw them in. It would be the same thing. The roller tube is kind of in the way. The larger board that you can use, the better. In the sample in the class, I used a 2.5-inch board, which is the minimum size. So if you can use a 3.5-inch board, that gives you more wood that you can access for either an inside mount or an outside mount. So yes, one thing you cannot do with the roller band, with a roller sheet system like this, is a reverse mount. You can't have the roller sheet going from the back to the front to do a reverse mount. So that is a drawback if you're doing an inside mount. So for pricing, this is an example. Never use a price from another workroom as your own without an analysis of your costs. And I set, when I'm teaching, I use $50 as an hourly rate because it's easy math. And it's also a good general hourly rate based on workrooms across the United States. So a workroom that's in the Midwest in a rural area would have a lower hourly rate because of their cost of living than somebody in New York City. So just keep that in mind. $50 is my example. I'm not telling you that your hourly rate should be $50 an hour. There is a book called Price Your Work with Confidence by Kitty Stein that can help you to learn how to set an hourly rate. There's great worksheets in that book. So all that said, based on the shade made in this class, that was 36 inches wide by 72 inches long, that's 18 square feet. I come up with square foot, that's the width times the length divided by 144. And estimated, it takes 4.5 hours. That includes the cutting, the planning, and the fabrication. And as you know for the first class, there was a lot of planning going on in this shade. And then your time might be more. It might be 6 hours. So that's when I'm estimating in my head, how long do I think this is going to take me to make? So 4.5 hours times $50 an hour, that's $225. And then the materials and supplies that we use, not including the kit for the lift system. And in this case, that included a lot of components. It wasn't just a lift system. So sometimes your cost of materials and supplies could include things like rings and cord shroud. For this shade, I needed lining and inner lining and some fusible stiffener and a board and rings, shade rings. And so that was approximately about $25. I buy everything wholesale and in bulk. So mark up your supplies. So that would be $50 for supplies. I just double as a markup. So to figure a square foot wholesale price for making this shade, the time, which was $225, plus the materials, that's $275 divided by 18 square feet is $12.50 per square foot minimum charge. Now that doesn't include the kit for the wideband lift sheet, which included a lot of components like J guides, acrylic rods, battens, the roller tube brackets, etc. So the wideband lift sheet kit, I just put an approximate price of $150. Shipping is all over the map right now, so that's easy math for me. So let's just say it was $150 for the size kit I ordered with the spring and the 10% openness lift sheet. So I mark that up as well. So $300 for the system. So the minimum price I would charge for the shade would be $225 for the labor and materials used, and then the headrail system. So it'd be $525. So now that's $29.16 per square foot. So I would round up to $30 a square foot for the interlined wideband lift sheet shade. Okay, I'm not a math teacher, but I think that kind of helps you, I hope, to wrap your head around pricing and make sure you don't forget stuff like shipping and components and materials and supplies. So let's see if you have any questions here at the end. And I'm available during the week if you have questions, or even after the class, you know, perpetual care. If you have questions down the road, or if you haven't had time to work on your class sample and you don't get to watch the videos until later, I'm happy to help you with your questions. And I'm not seeing any questions coming in today. I know I went a little long, had a lot to share. But thank you so much for attending the class, and thank you for your compliments on teaching. And I hope that your shade turns out well, and that what you've learned in this class will help you with all your shade projects. The more tips and tools and knowledge you have in your arsenal, the better you can attack your next shade project. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. The recording of this class will be sent out as soon as I get it uploaded and ready to go. So, and thank you, Sherry. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. I'll see you around. Bye.